Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad you're able to join me this Sunday morning here on Manx Radio for the farming programme. This week's programme will not be reminiscing and looking at former days and enjoying the nostalgia of our industry. Indeed, what we have for you today is bang up to date. It's considering the present situation, and indeed it's almost trying to look forward into the future, because this week, after much anticipation, we finally were presented with the Promar report. Now, Promar was the consultancy firm engaged by the Department of Agriculture a year ago to look into the future of farming on the Isle of Man. And already this week you will have heard many comments. But this morning we want to look at it in a little more depth and try and understand why the stances that are being held at the moment have been adopted by those who are now speaking. Let me remind listeners of what the remit was of Promar as they looked into the agricultural industry. It was to conduct a review of the island's industry from farm to point of sale, working in conjunction with the industry, the Department of Agriculture, and with a view to providing an analysis and recommendations thereon in relation to the following. And there are several headings there that Promar were required to look at under this review. The first one was the future optimum size, the viability and sustainability of the industry, the effectiveness and the efficiency of current production and processing methods, the current and future quality and marketing strategy and the product range, to look at the whole marketing gambit of the whole industry, to look at the role and effectiveness of government support. And so it went on to look at every single aspect of agricultural politics here in the Isle of Man. Well, as I say, we were all invited, at least the registered producers of the two associations, the Milk Marketing Association and the Fat Stock Marketing Association, were invited to the Mount Murray, where the Department of Agriculture were, with their consultants, presenting this report. Now, I sat in the gathering, which I have to say was probably one of the largest agricultural gatherings that I've been part of for many, many years on the island. Sitting behind me at that presentation was the president of the Manx National Farmers Union, John Crellin, and John joins me here now on the programme. John, welcome to the programme.
Morning, John.
You've been quite busy this week in commenting on the report, and I actually heard you commenting on the report as it was being presented. Why have you adopted the attitude that you have, John, having heard the report?
Well, it's quite an interesting issue. You've never seen so many people, as you say, present at an agricultural meeting on the island, and I certainly haven't either. And the overriding feeling that I got from that meeting was one of frustration. We've waited 12 months pretty well for this report to come out, and you can't help but be disappointed by the content. They've failed almost completely to address the 10 points they were supposed to look at in the review. And there's just a feeling that we've got absolutely nowhere. As you were saying to me earlier, if ever the industry was prepared to change, it was now. I think we would have looked at anything that had been suggested if it had offered a way forward for the future. But there just is absolutely nothing to get your teeth into, nothing to argue about, nothing to debate about. And I suppose the only thing you could say is if the £60,000 has been spent to get us to the point where we've all just had so much of nothing that we have to adopt a totally different attitude in our dealings with government, then maybe from that point of view, it is money well spent. But in terms of the piece of paper we've been given, I can't see where £60,000 has been spent at all.
John, if I take you back to the very first time that we heard that there was to be a review into the industry, what happened in agricultural politics? You preside over the council meetings of the NFU and you attend branch meetings. Lots of issues have been debated over the previous 12 months. What happened to those issues?
Well, they've gone nowhere. Some of the issues we have taken up with the department, and they've said, not surprisingly, well, we don't want to act on this yet. Wait for the Promar review to come out, and we'll look at it then. So really, agricultural politics has just stagnated for 12 months, and it's not as if we were in a position to stand still. The industry is spiralling downwards in many respects. And something has to be done to address these very major problems that we face, particularly with regard to the abattoir and fat stock marketing.
So we've actually lost time, in fact, in dealing with the issues that press on us at the present time.
Yes, we have. Incomes have gone down in that time, and the industry could ill afford this 12 months that's been spent getting nowhere.
Now, we didn't commission this report. It was actually commissioned by the Department of Agriculture. Why do you think, John, that government needed to review the industry as it's called for this report?
Well, if we go back to where it started, the industry, particularly the dairy industry, was suffering a very difficult time last spring, and money was made available by Tynwald, but the proviso was that £30,000 should be spent on a review into the dairy industry, and as an add-on, they suggested another 30,000 to look at the fat stock industry. So, I think the industry was probably quite pleased to see this. It showed some intent from government, at least. And obviously, government doesn't like handing out vast sums of money without some sort of accountability. And I take it that is why they wanted the review in the first place.
Do you think government was entitled then to take this stance and to request this in-depth review?
I do, yes. There's a lot of money being ploughed into the agricultural industry. We're all very well aware of this, and Tynwald has been extremely supportive of the industry in recent years. Ever since, in fact, we did our Anderson's report, which you remember well. But obviously, they're not going to keep on forking out money without knowing where we're going.
Could the report have done the industry some good, even though that it was a government inquiry? Could it have done the industry? Do you think it could have focused support and targeted support, maybe in maybe different ways? I don't know, whatever it might have said.
I would have hoped it would have done. That's certainly what the industry was hoping would come out of it. Yes.
And so as we look forward now, and obviously you say we've got nothing out of this report to take forward. What do we do now?
Well, we've already started to talk to the minister, and I should say that we've got no argument with the minister or the department at all. I would say the last two ministers we've had in that department have been very approachable. I mean, we haven't always agreed with each other, but they've been approachable, accessible, sympathetic, and I don't expect anything to change in that regard. So we are moving anyway, at least, and there's a meeting early next week with the union's commodity committee and the department, and also the chairman of the two executives, the milk and the fat stock. So hopefully we will start to look for a way forward. But I have to say, this hasn't really come out of anything that's in the review. It's born of the frustration and anger that farmers feel.
So do you think that present policy will continue as far as Tynwald is concerned and as far as the industry itself is concerned? Is that what's going to go on in at least the foreseeable future?
I think so, in the foreseeable future. I mean, Tynwald has constantly expressed an interest in supporting the farming industry, and the public seems to feel the same way. And I thought there was a very good leader in the Independent this week, much along those lines. But there's no doubt that we have to look for a different direction somewhere.
Yes, I was going to come on to that, John, because we can't stand still. We can't continue on because what we're doing is not working. So we have to change. What sort of directions? Have you any ideas as to sort of, they weren't in the report. Have you any ideas of your own as to sort of the areas we must now examine?
Well, I think the biggest problem is undoubtedly the meat plant, and this was touched on in the report. I mean, I've seen the full report, which you haven't, and it does mention 2 or 3 times in there that the UHCs, unit handling charges in the meat plant, are untenable, and the industry cannot afford them. We're talking about £200 to process a beast, as opposed to £50 in a similar sized or a similar UK abattoir. Now, somehow this has to be addressed, and I'm afraid that in the end we have to come down to the fact that government, not this current government, but government in the past, was responsible for building that abattoir. Now, it was built too large. It requires too many staff to run it. The design team that built it from MLC, that was the first abattoir they built, and it was the last abattoir they built. when the Fat Stock Marketing Association went in there, it was full of major design faults that they had to rectify before they could operate it. The rent has constantly been an issue, although it's not as important as the labour side of it. And I think in some way government are going to have to face up to the fact that we have to somehow deal with these costs, and the industry cannot afford to keep paying out the sort of money it is and hope to make a profit.
But if you listen to Bob Martin, who has the responsibility of managing that meat plant and managing the whole association, he says that he can't curtail the costs anymore. It's actually the running cost that's set up, and he's landed with it.
Yeah, they're absolutely integral in the abattoir. You can't get round them. I mean, you can fiddle around the edges and save, £5 here, £10 there, but there's no way that we're talking about a shortfall of £150 a beast. Now, you cannot. The report was suggesting marketing is the answer in the blandest of terms, but you cannot market another £150 into an animal, and somehow we have to get round this. We either have to put more stock through the abattoir, or government has to pick up the bill. The last thing we want is to have to start exporting cattle off the island alive. I don't think, or it's certainly in any large numbers, I don't think that the public particularly want it, the industry don't want it. We do need that abattoir, and we also need it for things like pigs, bull beef and milk lambs, which are not suitable for export. They need to be killed as close to source as possible.
So, if that has to be addressed, then, John, and the £150 difference that you identify as being the extra cost that we have to pay, I should imagine that in the UK that would be the profit element in a beast that we have to forego.
That's correct, yeah.
So it's not going to last much longer, is it?
No, the writing's on the wall. It really is, and I think this is what has really brought the anger out in the industry. It's that we've waited all this time while things are getting worse and worse and worse, and we've gained absolutely nothing out of the report in real terms.
Mm. Having said all that, John, we've somehow or other, between us all, between the industry, the NFU, the department and the associations, somehow we've got to find a way forward, haven't we?
Yes, we have. And I mean, you know as well as I do, the industry is incredibly resilient. And there's a Mark Perry of Bibby's once said to me, it takes a very long time to starve a peasant, and let's hope so.
John, that does sound like a note of optimism and of being positive. And can I hope that we will all, from this point on now, begin to work together to secure the future of the industry?
Yes, let's hope so.
John Crellin, President of the Manx National Farmers Union, thank you for coming in and joining me. Well, joining me now on the programme is the man at the centre of the Promar report, the man who is Minister of the Department of Agriculture, who actually commissioned the report, John Rimington. Tell me, John, why the report was thought to be necessary and why it was commissioned in the first place.
This arose when we approached Treasury for extra money for the dairy industry, which, as we all know, was in severe straits at that time. And I think quite rightly they said, yes, we will help you out, but we want a health check. We want to know where is the industry going. Because if we're going to be, needing to put extra money in, we want to know that this is good money for the taxpayer.
And did you feel that information was not available then, either within the industry or within the knowledge of the department or the associations?
There wasn't a clear report which did have that health check of the industry at the time. And this initially was focusing on the dairy industry, although I actually suggested that we should widen it out to include the fat stock industry as well, because I recognised very early on that that's a critical element as well.
So you set about commissioning this report, and the consultants, Promar, were given a remit as to what they were to look at, which presumably was what you wanted to know.
Yes, and that again was done in tune with Treasury. I know there is. I don't think we want to go through the detailed remit at this moment, but really it's looking at the overall position of the industry and is there a way forward? Is there a future for the industry?
It was in fact a very detailed remit, John, and some of the requirements of the commission was to and even if we just take the first one, John, was to look at the future optimum size, the viability and sustainability of the industry. That is a very, very wide remit.
It is actually, and I think with hindsight, you could say perhaps we should have allocated more money and expected more root and branch investigation of the industry if we were going to fulfil that remit to the fullest. That money wasn't available then, and we wanted to move things through in a faster time frame. So what we have really is a sort of what I would call a strategic overview, rather than the root and branch investigation of every aspect of the industry.
So when the consultants came onto the island, how did they begin their review? Presumably they would come to the department to be guided or to be advised. How did it all begin?
Yes, they were given the list of the key players that we felt they ought to interview and talk to, and they went about that job. Now, I must say this, we tried to make sure that we did not influence what they thought in any shape or form.
That, if I may say so, though, John, would be very hard to resist, wouldn't it? I mean, you had the choice as to who they may speak to, but that was a very, very sensitive area. That could, as you rightly suggest yourself, that could influence it.
It could, but obviously there are certain people that have to be spoken to, which, when we're dealing with the fat stock and dairy, are the main processors, and also the retailers, which was important, I think, and obviously key producers as well.
Now, you've heard, you actually were at the Mount Murray on Tuesday evening of last week. And I may say, John, I think I've said this to you before, I think it's a good job you were there, because I think you actually rescued the evening. And I think it's fair to say that the report probably wasn't presented that evening in the best possible way.
Yes, I think that's a fair comment. Actually, I think the consultants were treading new ground in presenting a report to a wide audience of farmers, and they're normally reporting to, if you like, smaller bodies of people in a committee room.
And it was a very critical audience, wasn't it? I mean, and I've already talked with John Crellin earlier in this programme, and we, I think, both agreed that it was probably the largest agricultural gathering that we've seen on the island for some time.
Yes, and I think it benefited from that, from all players being there and airing their views, whatever those views might be.
I think, and as well, we were saying earlier, and I wonder if you could accept and take this on board, that the industry had been waiting a year for this review, and it was. And some of us did know the remit that the consultants had been given. And with that remit, we had built up a certain expectancy and anticipation. And I think, and I know certainly from my own personal point of view, I, as a farmer, as a Manx farmer, I have never been more open-minded to suggestions made as to what might be our way forward. And to that end, I think there was, to put it mildly, some disappointment.
Yes, I accept there was disappointment. I think there was unrealistic expectations of what could come out of that review. And I think you'd probably be the first to recognise that any consultants coming from across the water, whoever they might be, could not come to the island in a short space of time and come up with a set of recommendations that the industry are likely to follow, sort of A, B, and C, just like that.
Nevertheless, their job here and this report was going to be extremely important to the industry. After all, it had been instigated by Treasury, commissioned by the Department of Agriculture, and there is a lot, and I'm the first to say it, there is a lot of government support in agriculture. So presumably it was going to influence that support either in amount or direction.
Yes, I think it is. Now, the sort of key recommendations out of there, or key points that they made, which I think are very valid. One is that essentially what the creamery is doing, its direction, is a valid direction, and in fact gave that a health check. And I think that's very important to note. And yes, there were issues to improve, recommendations to improve matters, and for the association to consider and work with the department on. In terms of the fat stock, it didn't get such a good health check. They were much more concerned about the future of the fat stock industry, not just on the issue of, very critical issue of throughput, but on issues to do with matching demand in the marketplace to production, and issues to do with quality, etc.
Now, you've heard farmers criticise, you heard it that night, the criticism and the disappointment of the report. Certain members of the industry, President of the NFU, the Chief Executive of the Fat Stock Marketing Association, have all voiced their disappointment at the report. You were able to say, though, that you thought it was a good report, so presumably you've got something out of this report that you were actually looking for.
We have. We've got an idea of the strategic issues that we need to address. Now, there are, and I've got this list with me, a number of sort of recommendations, some of them going down to, if you like, minor practical recommendations, and some for us to look at more closely with the industry. But strategically, they are saying you have got to look carefully at the market that you are producing into, what they want, and how can you supply that. And I think the message that they were saying, and it's a bit of a painful message, was that certainly on the fat stock side, we are not doing that at the moment, and we've got a long way to go to get there.
In terms of overall policy of the department, I detected in your contribution to the meeting that night at the Mount Murray a certain change in emphasis. John, is that fair? And I think you might know what I'm referring to.
Yes, I do. I know that I've been put forward the stewardship scheme at earlier times, and I don't regret that at all. And I think new ideas have got to be out there and be discussed. And I think that sort of principle is still with us and is inevitable due to changes that are taking place in Europe, etc. But out of that report came one recommendation, which was that farms on the island all need to be independently quality assured. Now, I know that is going to be painful, and that is going to require a lot of investment in the, if you like, the infrastructure of individual farms. So what I'm saying is that the government and the department has only so much money at any one time. Any money we were accumulating towards the stewardship scheme, we will have to divert and put into helping the industry meet that quality assurance standard.
What does the thrust of the report say then about production levels on the Isle of Man?
In terms of the dairy, it's really recommending that it should not increase, and that in the short term possibly it should be capped because there are particular short-term issues. But overall, I suspect they're saying it should not really be increased or in any significant way. In terms of fat stock on the meat side, it should not decrease at all, and if possible, increase.
So that may very well be one reason why the stewardship scheme does not lie happily with the recommendations of this, because that did require, in some instances, perhaps a decrease in production.
Yes, it could do. The stewardship scheme itself actually, given the stocking rates on the island, doesn't require a decrease or a significant decrease in production. It might. I accept it might do so because if you're giving money for other purposes, people will say, "Well, I will produce less." But having gone through the economic analysis and the modelling for that stewardship scheme, I know that there's only based on the June returns, there's only about 15 or 17 farms that would have a stocking rate which is too high.
But some of us have been saying for a long time, John, that Manx farming was no threat to the environment. We didn't believe that we were overstocked or over-intensive.
Yeah. And that is a very good point that came out of the report, and I think you'd be pleased that the report is agreeing with you, John, there. That's one thing the report said, that the environment is not threatened by our existing mode of practice.
Now, John, we have this report and we have the situation on the Isle of Man. Do you think Tynwald is more content now to administer the agricultural budget in light of this report? Has it actually satisfied the inquiries, calmed perhaps the apprehensions of Tynwald members?
I'm not sure. I have to take this report, and I'm going to obviously try and take the full report to Tynwald next month in March. And obviously we will do quite a lot of preparation and outline all the issues to Tynwald members so they have an informed debate on the issue. I would certainly hope, and I'm sure that within Tynwald there is a lot of support for agriculture, and there's a lot of support for finding a sustainable future for agriculture, and I think it's absolutely necessary.
Can you see any immediate changes that we might take out of this report? Is there anything that we can do quickly and now to sort of to change the situation in agriculture?
All the changes in there, I mean, by and large, are going to take sort of a minimum of a sort of 6 months, year, 2 years, so on, to come into effect, because we're talking about farmers' lives and their money and their livelihood. And if you're going to start changing production and trying to influence production in different ways, you can't do that overnight. You've got to bring those changes in over a period of years, really.
So have you already started in the department, or have you spent this week fielding the questions and the comment?
Our first thing we've done is we've organised a meeting with the key players, I think in probably about 10 days' time, and that'll be our first meeting, and then we will from there we'll decide how we go forward. But we do need to set up a regular set of meetings, sort of if weekly or 2 weekly, to take all these issues, possibly subdivide into groups, to look at particular areas and come up with recommendations to the main group.
Did you think there was any merit, John, in the size of meeting we had on Tuesday evening? Because I felt in that meeting there were a lot of ideas being advanced, and different ideas were bouncing off one another, and you should have been getting some valuable feedback out of a meeting of that size and that wide spectrum of opinion.
Yes, I think there is. Whenever you have such a large meeting, you do benefit from that, and certainly you hear a lot chatting afterwards and get a bigger range of views as well. And I think it was a very important evening for the industry, but it's only the beginning.
So, what's your message to the industry, John? Having had this report now, having witnessed the disappointment of it, where are we going to go now? What are we going to do?
Well, we have to take the recommendations that are in that report, look at them closely with the industry and see what we can do as quickly as we can, and put all our best attentions to it, put whatever's taken place in the past behind us and look to the future.
And Tynwald, you think we'll be happy with that? Do you think they'll receive the report and they'll go with your opinion on that?
I hope they do.
John Rimington, thank you very, very much for coming in and joining me in this week of wide agricultural debate as we've looked at the whole, the bones of our industry and really tried to find a way forward. We hope together we will be able to work with the department and all involved and find a way forward for this week. This is John Kennaugh signing off.